Cheer up, there are several feet of snow on the ground in northern Wisconsin. I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the Packers lay an epic beatdown on the Chicago Bears, 55-14, but it really wasn't that close. President Obama endorsed the so-called net neutrality and calls for more federal regulation of the internet. A major league heroin bust results in more than 50 arrests in Milwaukee. The presidential buzz around Governor Scott Walker ramps up in the wake of his third election victory in 4 years. And it turns out that Milwaukee City Hall is sinking, and it'll cost another $80 million or so to shore it up. But we start with a major local issue that's about to move to the front burner, the push for a new arena for the Milwaukee Bucks and the politics of getting the taxpayers to pay for it. The new Bucks owners want a new arena to replace the aging Bradley Center. The price tag, $400 to $500 million, and they want the public to chip in some of that. But any new tax would need approval by the Republican legislature. That may be tricky, and it's getting trickier. Last week, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos said that Bucks owner Mark Lasry complicated the deal when he made a high-profile appearance greeting President Obama at the airport when Obama came to town for a campaign rally for Democrat Mary Burke. Lasry is a big-time Democrat donor, and his decision to show up for a political event, quote, did not make my job easier, persuading Republican legislators to back public funding for Lasry's arena, Vos said. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former state representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Lynn DeBruin, and believe it or not, with his new haircut, Media Tracker's Brian Sikma. So let's talk about this. I think people are misunderstanding what Robin Vos is saying there, that he's not trying to shake down the Bucks owner. He's just basically describing a political reality that with or without Obama's visit, this is going to be a really hard sell for this legislature.
No, I think you're exactly right, Charlie. I mean, the Republican speaker is not trying to say there's a penalty on Democratic donors right now, but the fact of the matter is this is a Milwaukee problem. And what we've seen with Speaker Robin Vos, what we've seen with even Milwaukee area State Representative Dale Koenga and other state Republican leaders in the Assembly in particular, they're looking at it saying if this is a Milwaukee problem, Milwaukee needs to find a way to fix it and to pay for it. Why should the rest of the state be paying for a new arena?
Okay, now Vos has floated this one idea out there, which is, and there's a Legislative Fiscal Bureau memo that came out on Friday saying that the NBA generates about $10.7 million a year in state income tax revenue, and that would be enough to pay off a $150 million bond. So the argument would be, we wouldn't have that income, we wouldn't have that tax revenue if the Bucks leave. So let's basically create a super income tax TIF district. Do you think that there has any possibility that might be a formula that the legislature would accept, Dan Adams?
Well, that was the great hope early on, was, hey, let's take this money that we'd otherwise lose because these players wouldn't be here, they wouldn't be populating the coffers. I certainly understand an outstate legislator to say, hey, we're going to get that money. Why are we subsidizing millionaires and billionaires to play a game in Milwaukee, to a game that my family and my constituents are never going to go to? That being said, this is a regional problem. There are huge benefits to having the Bucks here. We can attract new businesses. We can attract and retain executives to help our economy. It makes sense that for Robin Vos and the Republicans to take a long view of this and not play petty partisan politics.
Okay, so is this going to be, ultimately, is this going to be a statewide solution, or is it going to be a regional solution?
I think it has to be a regional solution because I don't think you're going to have representatives in Rhinelander and Eau Claire and Toma saying, yes, we want state money to be spent down to subsidize billionaires in Milwaukee.
Okay, you think people from West Bend and Port Washington and Mukwonago are going to say, okay with that?
I don't think they're actually going to follow through with that either. I think Milwaukee needs to do what Sacramento did, and they said to their billionaires, you guys can afford it, pay for it yourselves. And they actually stepped up to the plate and did it.
I think it's got a hard sell no matter what, because the economics of this is a bad decision. The economics folks all over the country, from professors at Harvard and everywhere, say that city governments and state governments should not be funding major sports team franchises and arenas, that type of thing. And I think because over and over again they lose out. The taxpayers don't get paid back, et cetera. So I think the only glimmer of a hope is if there's a way to structure some sort of loan or TIF system in which the first guaranteed payback goes to whatever taxpayers are paying it. But I still think that's a long shot as well.
Yeah, I do think it's a long shot because, of course, if you start doing that with income tax, then other industries would say, okay, well, why don't we not pay our income tax to the state too and build us a new building or a new facility? And that's part of the problem with all of this, not to mention the millionaires and billionaires problem that you have here. So what about the possibility of, for example, taking the Wisconsin district tax and maybe blowing up the Wisconsin district and finding some way to make them play well together? Is there any possibility that something like that could happen?
You know, I don't want to be too cynical about politicians, but the more complex of a deal that you're talking about, the much harder it's going to be to get not just Republicans but Democrats and the public all in line with it. And I just think you're talking about the more complex the deal is, the harder it's going to be to achieve.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, I think that the idea of doing a regional sales tax type thing would be a very bad idea. And also the other problem that you have, as you pointed out, Charlie, is that if you look at just the incomes of the players, other companies are going to say, hey, what about our incomes that we play? So if there's a way to make sure that if there's all tax revenue from the Bradley Center, whether it's sales tax or some other things, whatever revenue is generated currently by that facility, if it's income tax, sales tax, if that's funneled into it and it's understood this is for a certain purpose, that might be a workable compromise. I'm skeptical of that personally, but I do understand there is a possibility we need to have a workable compromise in this.
I think the one possibility that could have possibly gone through is this idea of capturing the income. If that doesn't go, they need to find a plan B, and I have no idea what that's going to be. What is your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
Charlie, my glass is half full because state Senate Democrats did the right thing and threw Chris Larson overboard as minority leader. This was a no-brainer given Larson's complete failure in that role. My glass is half empty because of the unexpected death of former Assemblywoman Polly Williams at age 77. Williams stood up for kids first and challenged the status quo. She left huge shoes to fill. Rest in peace, Polly.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half full because the new Veterans VA Secretary, Robert McDonald, has a plan to reform the VA and has fired one of their top execs. It is half empty because he would like to fire 1,000 other employees, but because of civil service protections, it might be impossible to do so.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because the space probe Philae made a historic comet landing this week and is sending pictures that may tell us how life emerged on Earth. But my glass is half empty because the probe landed in a shadow, which means its batteries will run out soon.
Brian Sickmer.
Well, my glass is half full because conservative state lawmakers are skeptical of giving the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction a massive $613 million budget increase. But my glass is half empty because in fiscal years 2013 and 2014, the Department of Public Instruction spent nearly $300,000 in taxpayer money on resorts and Wisconsin Dells. I guess we should all go get government jobs.
Yeah. Well, my glass is half full because Aaron Rodgers threw 6 touchdown passes in the first half of last Sunday's game against the Bears. It's half empty because it was the Bears, and it would have been nice to see him throw another 6 in the second half. Now, next on Sunday Inside, Congress prepares for a fight over immigration.
Forget your...
Well, the voters moved right. President Obama's response? He's moving sharply left, most dramatically on the issue of immigration. Despite warnings from congressional Republicans that any unilateral executive amnesty would poison the well, Obama is reportedly set to sign executive orders blocking the deportation of as many as 5 million illegals. That seems likely to set off a confrontation with the new Congress even before it takes office. How's this going to play out? Is this a good idea, Michelle Litchens?
This is just ridiculous. But President Obama obviously did not listen to the election that happened last Tuesday at all, because the country said we don't want to go in that direction, and yet he's, putting his feet in the ground and he's digging on and moving forward. But this is the deal. The Republicans have to have a plan. They cannot stand up to the president and just say, no, we're not going to take that. No, we're going to stop funding this, and we're going to stop government again. They need to put forward a plan, and then America's actually going to follow that.
But they're not going to shut down the federal government, are they?
They better not shut down the federal government, because that would not be a wise move politically.
What's interesting is that the talk about finding common ground and bipartisan compromise lasted about, 7 days before we did sort of, and what I think is interesting is there are a lot of Republicans that support comprehensive immigration reform, and their reaction to this is that this pretty much kills the chance of any sort of a compromise or legislation.
I don't buy it. First of all, I don't consider that this, obviously part of the problem is we don't know what he's actually going to do yet. We just have, supposition. But, the majority of Americans support a way for integrating people into citizenship and becoming legal citizens of this country, especially for families who have children who were born here. That's the one piece that we think he really is absolutely going to do.
And that
so
doesn't require legislation? That doesn't require action from the U.S. Congress?
I think he absolutely should do this because the Congress has done nothing. The Senate passed some legislation. It got killed in the House. The Congress has now gone more right, and I think he has to do this to push the Congress to actually take some action.
Under our Constitution, it doesn't say that we have a separation of powers unless the Congress doesn't do what the president wants, and then the president can unilaterally do it.
He's also fulfilling a campaign promise from the very beginnings of his campaign, and he has to move this forward. I don't see Congress doing this, and if he doesn't do it, I don't think we'll end up with reform.
Concerned about the fact that we have a president who is about to unilaterally provide amnesty to 5 million without any congressional action.
I think that's a problem, Charlie. And I think you remember the day after the election, the president came out in that press conference and said, I've heard from those of you that have voted. And then he said, I've heard from those of you that didn't vote. Well, I think what we're hearing is the president's tone deaf by rolling this decision out. Look, if the president wanted to compromise, this is an awesome opportunity for him to do that. You have Republicans in control of both houses of Congress, so you don't have this Harry Reid, John Boehner ego trip going back and forth. You have Mitch McConnell, John Boehner. There are enough Republicans, I think, that are open to this, along with moderate Democrats who would want to work on some form of maybe a watered-down Obama plan. It wouldn't be full-out amnesty. There would be check the boxes, and you have to make sure that people provide progress. But if the president was pragmatic, he could get a historic win on this.
Dan Adams.
I think he is being pragmatic, with all due respect. Listen, he ran on this in 2008. He ran on it again in 2012. He got 66 million votes in 2012. He has a 4-year term, and this is a tool within the toolbox of the executive to say, hey, 4 million, 5 million people here, you're already here, you're not leaving. Let's at least take you out of the shadows, have you start paying taxes, and reduce.
So you're the lawyer on the panel, I guess. So the law now is what the president says it is.
No,
right?
it's discretion.
So the law is on the discretion for 5 million people.
Every executive, whether it's a police officer on the corner or a district attorney, can say, here's some laws that are being enforced unjustly. I'm going to use my discretion not to enforce it.
Okay, now, and that will also be providing the green cards, because I'm kind of a little bit, how that falls under that prosecutorial discretion, that you also hand out the green cards.
But isn't that good public policy to
I
kick
just
them on
want
the
to know
tax
whether,
roll?
yes, but maybe, now you mentioned that he ran on it as a campaign promise. I remember when Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and for whatever reason, they didn't bother to get around to doing anything on immigration.
Well, yeah.
So much for that. Hey, you may not want to hear it, but we will tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
My advice is to Alderman Joe Davis. Much like previous advice given to Bob Donovan, the Red Arrow Park police shooting is not a controversy to exploit for cheap political gain. If you want to appear mayoral, get above the fray.
Michelle Litchens.
For those who want to increase the minimum wage, McDonald's just installed 7,000 touchscreen cashiers in Europe to cut down on their costs. Be careful what you wish for.
Linda Bruin.
Well, the folks on my left aren't going to like this, but my advice is to President, well, on the right, actually. My advice is to President Obama. Don't back down on immigration. Use your executive action to push Republicans into enacting immigration reform legislation that you can sign.
Good luck with that. Brian Sickman.
Well, my unsolicited advice is for Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. Mayor, City Hall is crumbling around your administration. Why not take all that money you would use for repairs and enter a joint venture with the Milwaukee Bucks? Between the two organizations, you might actually afford a decent new building downtown.
Well, my unsolicited advice is to supporters of Obamacare. If you pass a law based on fabrications, misrepresentations, and lies, don't have your guy go on videotape bragging about it. Next on Sunday Insight, the scramble for Waukesha County Executive after Dan Vrakas decides to step down. Waukesha County Executive Dan Vrakas steps down, setting off a scramble for his job. After 9 years in office, Vrakas said last week that he wouldn't seek re-election next spring. He had been diagnosed with cancer last fall and says he's doing well, but that it was time to move on. Now, jockeying began almost immediately with some high-profile names being floated. State Senator Paul Farrow announced that he was running. Others mentioned include State Representative Dale Koinga, State Representative Dave Craig, and educator Brian Doro. Now, Koinga and Craig say they're not running. So who has the edge here? What's going on, Brian Sigmund?
Well, certainly anybody in state government would have looked at it. I mean, it's a big pay raise from what you get paid as a state senator or a state assemblyman, and it's a great job to have, really. I mean, you're in charge of a very populous county. It's a great county to begin to innovate. I mean, Dan Vrakas did a lot of good things as county executive. I think that Senator Paul Farrow has the lead in this. I mean, the Farrow name is well known around the Waukesha County area. His mom was lieutenant governor. I think Brian Darrow may throw his hat in the race because he is someone who's been interested in running for public office. But I think right now Farrow has the lead.
I don't think it's got the lead. I think that Paul Farrow has virtually cleared the field. I mean, when you saw how fast that happened, I mean, he represents a big chunk of it. He's got the Farrow name. He's moved very quickly. He's going to be supported by Dan Vrakas and a lot of the people in the Waukesha County Republican Party. So at this point, I mean, he's pretty much almost got a lock. And I know it's
never underestimate Waukesha County.
And I would completely agree with that. I'm also very sad to see Paul Farrow leave the state Senate. I think he was a consensus builder. He definitely had far to go as a leader in the state Senate. But Waukesha is going to do well with him there.
Well, for our liberals on the panel, Waukesha is what you guys consider flyover country, right?
Right.
You know, between Milwaukee and Madison, it's that thing in the middle, right?
It's a beautiful bedroom community for our city
Great
here.
mall.
I don't understand why he would leave the legislature at this moment in history when the Republicans have more power to enact an agenda at the statewide level than ever.
I think that's an excellent question, actually, and it goes to the other question, which is, you know, it's been a low-profile position under Dan Vrakas, although Scott Walker did demonstrate what you can do with the county executive position. So then the question becomes, can that position become a springboard for higher office?
It shouldn't. County government should never be a springboard for anything. It's not the sexy wing of government. It's just an arm of the state government to administer state programs.
Is it
a lot of that's true.
But an executive experience.
A lot of what happened in Milwaukee County, though, is because Milwaukee was so screwed up, and when Scott Walker was elected, he was able to make some drastic changes there, or at least try to, which elevated him then to run for governor. So I'm not necessarily sure that a lot that happens as county executive is going to, going to build you up for
state
governor.
Representatives or the legislative branch, they legislate policy. Being an executive in the executive branch, which is an administration, is a completely different skill set. So I think it says that he's trying to get into that area, and a lot of legislators find that that's where they want to go.
I think you're right about that. So what is it that you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. We'll start with you, Dan Adams.
Charlie, what I don't get is why Madison Mayor Paul Soglin is still blocking ride-sharing services like Uber from operating. Uber is a great success in Milwaukee, providing quick, safe, and cheap transportation. Shouldn't this be encouraged everywhere?
Michelle Litchens.
Charlie, what I don't get is why a liberal activist group dispersing $9 million to unspecified liberal organizations in Wisconsin isn't dark money worth a story in the newspaper.
Linda Braun.
Well, I don't get why 5 detectives in the New Orleans Special Victims Unit still have their jobs after investigating only 14% of the physical and sexual abuse cases reported to their unit over a 3-year period, including a detective who said he closed the case of a 2-year-old with a sexually transmitted disease because the toddler didn't disclose any information that would warrant an investigation.
Brian Sickma.
What I don't get is why Wisconsin teachers unions would funnel money to a liberal organization fighting for a minimum wage increase when that organization is run by a man who was caught with a prostitute. Well, so much for that liberal talking point about a war on women, I guess.
Well, what I don't get is why nobody told us until this week that it will cost $80 million more to keep City Hall from sinking, on top of the $76 million we just spent restoring the terracotta. Now, maybe we could use some of that money from the downtown trolley for City Hall. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My winner is Rhode Island Governor-elect Gina Raimondo. The 43-year-old businesswoman showed a Democrat can win in a Republican wave year. Raimondo was attacked by public sector unions for her courageous support of pension reform in her state. She's a rising star. My loser is the Indiana truck driver who drove his 18-wheeler into a pedestrian bridge in Milwaukee's Lake Park, almost killing himself. Bro, you've just proven everything we already knew about Colts fans.
Michelle Hitchens.
My winner is Deanna Alexander. Deanna is a strong conservative voice of reason on the dysfunctional liberal Milwaukee County Board, which is why the Journal Sentinel criticized her for raising money to pay for her father's funeral. They only attack you, Deanna, because you are an effective supervisor. Stay strong. My loser is President, or should I say King Obama. Let me remind you, Mr. President, that we don't have a king, and in this country, if you want to change the law, you have to pass legislation through Congress. Or did Sal Alinsky and friends tell you that the idea of 3 equal branches of government is only a suggestion?
Yeah. Linda Bruin.
Well, my losers are the hundreds of thousands of women and children who have not been able to get justice after being raped because their untested rape kits are gathering dust in police stations across our country. The backlog includes 12,000 kits in Memphis, 11,300 in Detroit, and at least 3,000 kits across Wisconsin. My winners are President Obama, who's seeking $41 million in his next budget to reduce the backlog, and Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance Jr., who last week pledged $35 million to test kits from anywhere in the country.
Brian Sickler.
Well, my winner of the week is China. The country there entered into a climate change agreement with President Barack Obama this week that promised them a free pass on all their polluting until around 2030. Meanwhile, the U.S. will, of course, continue to impose restrictive and unnecessary and burdensome regulations. My loser of the week is the Milwaukee Public Schools Barack Obama School of Career and Technical Education. It's the only school in Wisconsin named for the President Obama, and on a state report card, it receives a failing grade of 39.4 out of 100. That's actually a lower percentage score than President Obama's favorability ratings in Wisconsin. Milwaukee students deserve better.
Well, loser, State Senator Chris Larson, the Senate Minority Leader, stepped down last week before he was kicked out. He was a train wreck as a legislative leader, but a true disaster as a campaign mastermind. Democrats cleaned house. Winner, State Senator Paul Farrell. Unless something very unexpected happens, Farrell looks like the prohibitive favorite to be the next Waukesha County executive. Thanks for joining us, and join me for my radio show on Monday morning. It's on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.
Send your